most people in the room haven't said anything. And now is an opportunity. I would like some practical ideas. Lord Tuivakano, in his excellent keynote speech, asked to go away from this with some ideas that he can put into practice. And so now is an opportunity for everyone in the room to come up with some ideas, either now or later. But we've had a very rich discussion, but I would like to pursue that thought. One came from Harold about smarter assistance, and I think linking that to complexity, the points that Michelle made about thinking through building resilience, getting it beyond rigid structures, I think there are all sorts of ways in which the excellent support given by Singapore in terms of training could perhaps take on some of these ideas and help all countries, but particularly small island developing countries facing real crises in many ways to tackle this. But before I say any more, thoughts. The room is full of bright people, and most of you haven't said anything. So, sir, give us a solution that Lord Tuivakano can take home, put in his suitcase, and when he gets to the SIDS conference, unveil it to a surprised world.
Thanks very much, Max. Raymond Kwok from Kwok Group LLP and VC.com. I understand that it's going to have the third UN conference of SIDS. I'm quite new to SIDS, and then I do not know whether in the audience most of the people are aware, because if the conference is once every 10 years, it means the first two was nearly 20 years ago. Can somebody share with us actually what were the agenda at that time and what were the deliverable, the wishes that they actually did? And going forward, like what you said, I think what Peter suggested, they come up with a small list. It will be useful to identify what is that small list that going forward. The topics is the second question is what does complexity approach have to offer? I was thinking, why are we keep on using complexity? I understand that that is seems to be the in thing in the academic world as well as in the real world, but can we not sort of rewind backwards and say, can we find simplicity solutions or simplicity issues so that we can address it rather than keep on going forward into the complex world? I know that we are in a complex world, but maybe that will be useful. Hearing the Prime Minister was saying that consultancy or the funding is 100,000. The consultancy will take 2/3 of it. That left with very little for the implementations. This is basically issues that definitely need to be addressed. And I'm just suggesting whether there's one can take away is that I know private organization has a profit margin, but I'm sure that they can do quite a lot using a cost-plus approach on some of this project that is shared with the SID world. Basically, yes, they can make a lot of money with the developed country, but for SIDS, whether there is a model that we can say, for those project that is in the SID world, can we offer basically a cost-plus sort of solution? Just my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir, please.
I have a very practical, more of a challenge, I suppose, for the Prime Minister to announce that his attendance at the SIDS conference will be his last, unless it is renamed the Big Ocean Developing States event. And I have to confess that I completely stole that from Lord Whakafanua, the Speaker of the Parliament, who I had the chance to spend some time with recently. And I think it speaks to Michelle's point about reframing the narrative and really setting up a situation where challenges and opportunities are looked at equally. And so oftentimes, and I think very quickly, the discourse moved from sustainability to resilience, which speaks to the impending sense of crises. So if we're able to create a space where these actors can come together and think about what brings them together, rather than just sort of survive and thrive mode, I think that would be extraordinarily beneficial.
Thank you. I think that's a very helpful point. Of course, the Pacific is different from the Caribbean, where each sort of country, you can see the next one, so they may not be quite such large ocean states. Peter, please.
Thanks. Just to pick up on that last point, the Prime Minister knows very well that UNDP has a strong program on building Tonga's resilience, particularly in terms of disaster risk management and preparedness. And I think, we've heard a lot also about the fact that in some of these small island countries in big oceans, they are small societies in terms of numbers. And one of the challenges, and I think Michelle alluded to this also, is that the state-society interface or the political bureaucratic interface is very small and personal and familiar. And that can be a strength, but it can also actually create its own challenges. The notion of a sort of impartial sort of, technocratic bureaucracy that acts in a kind of rational way, the sort of Weberian kind of notion, is very difficult to achieve in small island countries because everybody knows everybody, and officials and politicians, and I'm sure the Prime Minister knows this very well, you can't walk down the street in Nuku'alofa without seeing everybody you know. And so it is hard for officials to, in a sense, be able to separate themselves in a more objective way from citizens and make decisions around the allocation of resources and things like that in a perhaps more objective way, rather than being subject to, the pressures from people within your family or your village or, your extended community. And I think, so I want to link this notion of building resilience, and I think at one level, the smallness of these societies and the interconnectedness is actually a real strength in terms of building resilience on the one hand. But on the other hand, there is this challenge around the familial and the personal that may sometimes actually prevent us from making slightly more rational or objective decisions around how we address particularly the issue of resources. And so what I want to propose, if the Prime Minister is open to this idea, is that we work with him and his government to explore this issue further around building on our existing work that UNDP has on building resilience through, the natural disaster work and also our governance program that we have there, to see whether we can explore further this issue of how small societies can build resilience also in terms of their governance structures, not only just in terms of dealing with natural disasters, because we have this, this strong relationship already with his country, but also because Tonga is, as we know, quite a small country, and what are some of the lessons that we could learn in helping Tonga to think through some of these things, but that might also be useful for other countries in the Pacific and elsewhere that are also small societies but maybe suffer some of the same challenges. Just a proposal, but we're interested to hear the Prime Minister's view on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I saw the Prime Minister nodding, so I take that as agreement rather than that he's fallen asleep, which I can confirm for those who are not in the front row that he hasn't. So thank you. Other points?
Can I request for missing link?
Missing link?
Yeah. Firstly, with regard to number one, in context of the non-mention, the poverty white papers, can we expect for the poverty white papers forthcoming? Beside that, the women empowerment in the SIDs, and also with regard to the Excellency Prime Minister was talking about the blue and the green and blue grains economy. What new perspective is forthcoming that we can look forward? Is it the old story or is it the new version? Thanks a lot.
I think let's park that, because I'm not sure the relationship between that and complexity. But there is a key issue, and perhaps we can discuss that afterwards. When it comes to the blue economy, however, we have a bodyguard who's a fish. Which actually, of course, the good thing about Nuku'alofa, it's perfectly safe. So I'm delighted that Lord Tui Vakano tells me he can walk up and down the seafront with the fish guarding him. And sorry, I just can't get that concept out, which either shows I'm a very simple or a very overly complex person. Other points, please, sir.
I'm Donald Wright from NUS alumni, and I think I've enjoyed this session very, very much. And my little contribution here is also in connection with developments in the small islands. In my last career, which I'm a retired guy now, but my last career I spent quite a few years in international freight, working with the International Federation of Freight Forwarders, and I was manager for the Asian region. And my experience, of course, is that in managing freight agencies in the islands, yes, in Fiji, and the islands too did have freight agencies. One of the biggest problems there was that they could not get movement of freight either one way or the other. And with development, of course, in the islands now, even in Indonesia, I mean, don't go as far away as Tonga. One of the big problems, of course, is that you may try to create development in the islands, and the islands, of course, have many, many things that are very useful, I mean, in the international food world, for instance. Let's take something as simple as coconuts. One of the big items that us here in sort of more developed regions take for our daily meal is coconut oil. And yet, I mean, from all the islands, you think, if they had a maritime system where they're organized internationally or by some kind of central organization, central body, that sort of went around and collected copra. And no, it was taken to some major island like Tonga. No, as Lord Prime Minister would like to start up an oil processing company there and have something as simple as coconut oil. And there's a world market for it. But they haven't got that facility. And the same thing too with air transport. I think some of the islands did have no sort of small light planes, right? I mean, even Fiji had Air Fiji. I'm not sure if Air Fiji is flying. But there again, I mean, the facilities for tourism, for instance, to the islands, that's fantastic. But is there a facility? No. And why not? Well, because there's no organized traffic into that region. Well, these are thoughts that, simple things, yes, simple things can become big things. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, very helpful points. Michelle, please.
Just one idea, Honourable Prime Minister, and that is about if we can open the spaces for the solution identification. I think one of the challenges we have in small states is that despite technology and everything else, in many of the SIDS, information is still power. And because also of smallness, sometimes we have a sense that we know our constituencies. And so the decisions and the ideas and the approaches based on really objective evidence, sometimes there is a gap between assumption and evidence because we feel because of smallness we know the situation and the context so well. Very often, in much of the work we do in UNDP in terms of the analysis, you end up with a lot of myth debunking. Because when you actually do the analysis, the data tells you something different from the accepted wisdom. And so I think that's a very important lesson, I think, across the board in SIDS, that if we can focus a little bit more on just concrete evidence gathering, once a problem is identified, also allow the spaces for solutions to emerge from various parts of the country to fit the problem, because we also state the problems in the same ways we state the assumptions. And then we end up on continuing along a very same path.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed, and I couldn't agree more. I think in development, perhaps, I mean, even surprisingly, as far as I understand from my friends in the medical profession, it's surprising how many things, people know if you take a certain tablet it has an impact, but why? Even in things as well studied as medicine, is not clear. And in development, as Duncan very helpfully pointed out, frankly, as he rightly said, very often we don't have any idea about why things work or don't work. And that's a big professional secret, indeed, that one should never let out of the box, which is the same as, we've all studied in academia, and the outrageous idea of putting forward ideas simply and clearly, would have mass unemployment consequences. But I think that point about looking at the need for more research, more evidence, what really works, is very helpful. Any other points that anyone would like to make? Duncan, please.
Putting that together, Peter's just sort of suggestion on resilience, and what you're saying about actually studying what works, it would be quite interesting for the things which do require a kind of emergent approach. Some things clearly are linear and you can just go ahead and do that. I agree with that. But something like resilience to climate change, to have a speeded up process of experimentation, testing ideas, with some help from Singapore's experience in this, could actually lead to some faster emerging solutions to some of the adaptation and resilience problems.
I'd like to second a suggestion that Peter made from up on the stage, which is perhaps focus on an issue area where shared service provision in perhaps the Pacific could be explored. A regional public good, something technical maybe. And the reason I say this is twofold. One, that this could be the basis for exploring and building political capital, relations across the small island states, and developing political agency for the region collectively and empowering on the global stage to face these complex problems such as climate change. But secondly, in the spirit of complexity, as Duncan pointed out earlier, and venture capitalism, perhaps experiment with a few different ways of doing this, see what works, try it in different issue areas. I think that would be a valuable experiment. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that's a very helpful idea for His Lordship to take to Samar, this idea of much more experimentation. Please.
Hi, my name is Lailin Heng. I'm an environmental law professor at NUS. And I notice our Center for Environmental Law is one of the partners listed for the building of capacity training programs. I just want to make a few comments and suggestions since we were asked to provide some suggestions to the government of Tonga. I will not go into the complexity issue except to emphasize that, as has been mentioned, each country, each nation must sort out its priorities. Okay? Some suggestions from the Singapore experience. Firstly, on the issue of scholarships, right, which was mentioned, the Singapore experience is that you take control of the scholarships because you're trying to build capacity for your people. What usually happens is these are the brightest in your country, and they will be tempted to remain in the country where they are studying. Then you have lost your people, the expertise. What we have done in Singapore is the government has taken control in the past of all the scholarships offered, not only by them, but by international agencies. And whoever is given a scholarship must sign a bond, a contract, to come back and serve the country. So that's one lesson. The second lesson that we've learned is the example of public housing. Now, I'm a property lawyer. Yes, what we did was the government traveled to other countries to see what they did in terms of public housing. But then you have to think of your solution that best fits your country. Now, I believe that Singapore now has one of the best public housing systems in the world, and it's because we have a completely different system. We put in the element of home ownership. Public housing in developed countries, you don't own the property, you lease it. And when you lease it, you don't really care what happens to it, so it very quickly becomes a slum. In Singapore, you buy it on a 99-year lease. So you actually own it for 2 generations. Therefore, you take care of it. So that's another solution that we came up with. Thirdly, it is important to link what the development and aid agencies are giving you. I'll give you an example. In one of our training programs, we had the example of pollution in an urban environment and the case of Vietnam. Okay? The Vietnamese government official who came said that they just passed a very strong law on water pollution. And it was because there was aid coming from a developed country to help them in drafting this law. But he said the law was useless because there was no physical infrastructure. So they don't even have a laboratory to test the effluent. So this is a very good example of the need to coordinate. You must be smart about it. If you're getting aid from country A and country B, link the two together, right? The third is, in the context of Tonga's problems, you're an island, you mentioned the blue economy. Therefore, you have to take very good care of your marine resources, right? I don't know what's the problem in, what are the challenges in Tonga, but certainly in this region, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in the Philippines, there is a lot of cyanide and dynamite fishing. You have to stop that. And how are you going to stop that? You have to provide, as you've mentioned, the alternatives, tourism, for example, right, as an alternative, but you need to convince these people. I mean, I've seen a video where, I think this was done by the Nature Conservancy. They were trying to stop cyanide fishing in Indonesia. And when they interviewed this Indonesian fisherman, and they said, you mustn't do this. Because they told him, you mustn't do this because there won't be any fish left for your children. And he looked very puzzled. And he said, but that's why I'm doing it. I don't want my children to be fishermen. You see? So there's that relationship that I think one has to educate the people. And I'm sure in Tonga, the culture is very strong that you appreciate your marine environment. Lastly, I mean this in some seriousness. We had that comment from a member of the audience in relation to why is Singapore so anti an ombudsman. I just want to emphasize that having grown up in Singapore, where we had a very polluted environment, a very poor people, and very sensitive race relations. We had 2 race riots. We cannot have a Western-style democracy. And that's why we value the rights of each race and each religion. We respect them. We do not condone the burning of the Quran, for example, which other countries have attempted to do. So again, each nation has to work out its own solutions. Ours is not a Western-style democracy. Okay? As to when we are mature enough to open up a bit, I think we, the people, will decide. Okay? So finally, I would like to recommend that the book, in all seriousness, Lee Kuan Yew's biography, From Third World to First, is highly recommended reading. And I say this because I myself am disappointed that many of my students have not read it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Because my right of reply is out of context, that's all. I didn't put the context. What she said was, I'm saying ombudsman that the Korean did, for example, for Jeju Islands, for development, not in political sense. The political dimension is out of context. So it's taken out of context because there's no clarification of that. In terms of religious or other things, you must look at the context, not silo, and not irrelevant, not those yesteryears. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Although my understanding of both Vanessa's and the environmental law professor's point was that context was the critical driving factor. But thank you very much for that. And I think that point also on property rights and relationship between that and democracy is, of course, well established in the political science literature. But one of the things that we are also looking at in the centre is how one thinks long term in terms of intergenerational, how an ombudsman type role could help intergenerational challenges, not only environmental but fiscal and others. So I think all sorts of ideas that have come out of that. I don't know how bulging suitcase Lord Tuivasa has with all these ideas. If he's charged extra for your luggage, sir, we will send the bill to the Lee Kuan Yew School. But some very helpful points came out. I won't recap them all, but we will have captured them one way or another. So I think it is now my pleasure, as well as my duty, to thank everyone who has contributed to the discussion, to thank our presenters and panelists, thank those people who have come a very long way, like Duncan and others, particularly to thank the Lee Kuan Yew School for cooperating or collaborating with us on this event. And finally, to thank Lotu, who has done a sterling service, helping us from the Tongan end set this up. And finally, sir, to thank you, Prime Minister, for coming and adding an enormous amount of personal experience and feeling for the importance of this subject. Although I thought when you said Tonga was thinking of making waves in a particular field, that for a country that suffers from tsunami, that was a rather risky idea. But I've had the blessing of going to Tonga 3 times, and most people may not be aware that when Captain Cook first went there, he was so impressed by the gentle and kind nature of the people that he called it the friendly islands. I must say my experience has been very similar, although my Tongan colleague who went with me said, but it's much more complicated than that. Actually, they were all planning to murder them all, but never quite got round to it. So this is quite alarming, and I'm still not quite sure which is the right version of history. So back to Vanessa's and other people's, and Michelle's point about the importance of history, I couldn't agree more. I was also interested in the point that Bhutan has more alumni of Lee Kuan Yew School than any other country. And that's the country of happiness. I'm not quite sure whether you're happy and therefore you come here, or you come here and you become happy. Classic problem with research, direction of causality, and I'm sure one of the many academics here will immediately be writing up a proposal for further research. But thank you all very much for ideas. And the serious point, which has come over many times, is the importance of leadership. And I will not embarrass the Prime Minister, but I think it's important that people in the audience are aware of the enormous transition in Tonga that he has overseen. That Tongan constitution was changed 3 or 4 years ago by the late king, from being a sort of executive monarchy to a full parliamentary democracy. And his lordship has played a key role in that transition. Tonga may be a small country, but a fascinating one. It has the second oldest constitution in the world after the United States. I think your constitution says 135 years or so old, which, coming from a country with no constitution at all, is an amazing achievement. But thank you, sir, very much for coming. And we had a lot of discussion about what UNDP could do. Well, I look to Vanessa and the colleagues from Singapore Foreign Ministry to help with our funding, which you do very generously, but funding is always tight. And as a result of that, on the problems of climate change, we've been working very hard on a solution, but in the centre, our resources are limited. But I would like, sir, to give you our special prize.